Hey, welcome everyone. Hey, thanks for spending some time with us today. So I'm Stephen Lauber, and I'll be your host for today. And this is the first session in our Copilot Summer Series. This series is going to run every 3 weeks throughout the summer. And I know summer hasn't officially started yet, but here in West Michigan, we've already had a pretty good preview this past week. So we're getting an early start. So now today's conversation is intentionally foundational. We're not starting with features, productivity tricks, or demos. We're starting with clarity because without clarity, AI adoption tends to create either fear or false confidence. So today is about establishing shared understanding before anything else happens. And as we get going, let's do a quick check. If you guys can hear me clearly and see the slides, could you just drop a quick yes in the chat for me? Great. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. So we'll use the chat throughout the session. So if you got questions or thoughts, they come up as we go. Feel free to put them there. I'll make sure we leave time at the end for questions and some discussion. But before we jump in, let me quick introduce myself. As I said earlier, I'm Stephen Lauber. I'm the CEO of Trailhead. We are a technology partner, and we work with businesses to protect their data, reduce their technology risk, and help their leaders stay in control as emerging technologies show up in their organizations. So here's a QR code that will take you to my contact page. If you find this conversation useful, I'd encourage you to connect with me. Connect with me on LinkedIn. There I share my thinking, share examples, and some of the lessons that we've learned as we help organizations work through AI adoption. Not just what's new, but what actually holds up in practice. And if something sparks a question or a reaction as we go through the series, I'm always open to continuing the conversation, whether that's a message, a Teams call, or even a cup of coffee. So, all right, as I mentioned, we spend a lot of time helping businesses adopt emerging technologies because they don't arrive neatly packaged. They show up unevenly. They raise questions faster than they provide answers. And organizations are left trying to decide, what actually matters and what doesn't. And Copilot is a good example of that dynamic. So we created this series because, AI it's already showing up inside most organizations. And often before leadership has had the chance to step back and decide how they want it used or even whether they're comfortable with how it's being used. So people are experimenting. Public tools are easy to access, and blocking AI outright usually doesn't stop usage. It just pushes it underground where there are fewer guardrails and less visibility. So this series exists to slow things down in the right way. Help leaders engage with AI intentionally instead of reactively. And this series is designed to build progressively. Today is about understanding what Copilot is and why it matters. And then in session 2, we'll talk about guardrails and responsible use, not as a barrier to adoption, but as the foundation that makes adoption safe. And then we'll move into everyday workflows and practical use cases, and eventually what it looks like to expand Copilot use thoughtfully over time. So each session will stand on its own, but the real value comes from following the progression. So Copilot isn't really about speed. The deeper problem it's solving is context. See, work today lives across emails and files, and chats, maybe meetings and systems. Generic AI tools don't understand that environment, so they guess. An AI without context produces generic answers. AI without guardrails introduces risk. Copilot exists to bring AI into the flow of work, not around it. So Microsoft Copilot is best understood as an AI orchestration layer for work. It combines large language models with Microsoft Graph data, and that's things like emails and files, your meetings and chats. And it surfaces that inside the Microsoft 365 tools that people already use. It's not a separate system that you have to navigate. It's embedded directly into the environment where work already happens. And it's just as important to talk about what Copilot is not. Copilot is not autonomous. It doesn't make decisions on your behalf. And it doesn't replace human judgment. And your prompts and your responses are not used to train foundational AI models. Copilot can only surface information you already have permission to access and nothing more. So resetting expectations early is critical to responsible use. And one reason Copilot feels confusing early on is there isn't just one Copilot. There are multiple Copilot experiences, and they behave very differently. At the most basic level, you can use Copilot chat without any work context. So this is similar to public AI tools. It's useful for general questions, maybe brainstorming or learning, but it doesn't understand your organization. So this is AI adjacent to work, not AI inside work. And then when Copilot is licensed and connected to Microsoft 365, that's when it becomes meaningfully different. That's when Copilot can reason across emails and files, maybe meetings and chats, but only what you already have permission to access. And then you may also hear about some of the more advanced Copilot capabilities, things like researcher and analyst or other agent style experiences. Those are powerful, but power without foundation creates some risk. So that's why we're sequencing this series intentionally. We'll get to those capabilities in our upcoming sessions. And then I want to pause here and make something really clear because this is one of the most common misunderstandings I see. You don't need to have a Microsoft 365 Copilot license to start getting value from Copilot. Right? Every organization with a Microsoft 365 business licensing already has access to Copilot chat. And that experience includes the same enterprise-grade security, the privacy, and compliance protections we've been talking about today. And that matters because it gives teams a safe place to experiment with generative AI, not in public tools and not in consumer accounts, but inside the same environment where identity, permissions, and data governance already exist. Public AI tools can be incredibly powerful, but they're not designed around your organization's data boundaries. When people use those tools with sensitive or private or proprietary information, they don't often realize what risks they're taking on. So Copilot chat inside Microsoft 365 dramatically reduces that risk by keeping experimentation within enterprise controls. So, and Copilot chat, it's not a toy. It's not a stripped down demo. It's a practical way to learn how Copilot responds and how prompts work and how judgment still plays a role without having to commit to broader deployment yet. So for many organizations, this is exactly where confidence starts. That doesn't diminish, though, the value of the Microsoft 365 Copilot license. The licensed experience unlocks deeper integration into apps and richer work context and more advanced capabilities, which we'll get to later in this series. But it's important to understand that Copilot adoption doesn't have to be all or nothing on day one. And this is very consistent with how we approach emerging technologies in general. We want to start with understanding and then experiment safely, build judgment, and then expand deliberately. And Microsoft didn't release Copilot as a turn it on and hope for the best kind of tool. There are structured adoption resources that are designed to help organizations think about expectations, their readiness, and responsibility. And we're not diving into those today. Today is about understanding the foundation they're built on. But it's important to know this wasn't designed to be rushed. And one reason Copilot matters is where it runs. It operates inside your Microsoft 365 tenant, honors existing permissions, and it keeps data within the same security and compliance boundaries you already rely on. So that makes it a fundamentally safer starting point than public AI tools. And Copilot doesn't eliminate risk, though. What it does is reveal existing risks faster. If someone shouldn't see a file today, Copilot shouldn't see it either. But if data is overshared today, Copilot can surface that more clearly, which is why permissions and expectations matter more, not less. And another common question is, what AI model is Copilot actually using? So one quick clarification that's worth making here. When you use Copilot Chat, the default experience is auto, meaning Copilot is going to select the underlying model based on the request you're making, and that's intentional. That reduces some friction and it keeps people focused on the work, not the mechanics. But that said, Copilot also allows users to explicitly choose models in some cases. For example, maybe selecting something between OpenAI or Claude options when you want more control over how a response is going to be generated. What's important for today's conversation isn't which model you choose. It's that all of these options operate within the same enterprise security, privacy, and governance boundaries. The difference is control, not risk. And one important reassurance I want to add here, because it comes up a lot, is many people are familiar with specific AI models, maybe a particular OpenAI or Claude version, and they want to experiment with those capabilities. What Copilot allows you to do is to use those models inside your existing Microsoft 365 environment without having to expose private, sensitive, or proprietary information to public versions of those tools. So you don't have to move data outside of your tenant. You don't have to create separate accounts, and you don't have to purchase individual licenses just to experiment safely. All of this still operates within the same Microsoft 365 identity, security, and compliance boundaries that you already rely on. So the value here isn't model choice, it's controlled access. And Copilot isn't a destination. You can access it through a web browser, through desktop apps, mobile devices, and directly inside tools like Teams, Outlook, Word, and Excel. And that matters because Copilot shows up while work is already happening. So before we talk about guardrails or advanced capabilities, I want to ground this conversation in something very practical. Where do people actually experience Copilot? Because Copilot isn't a separate system that you train on and then use later. It shows up while work is already happening. So we're gonna switch over to a little demo of this and kind of show you what this looks like. So this is Copilot access through a web browser. And I'm starting here intentionally because this is often the first place that people encounter Copilot, especially leaders who aren't living inside Word or Teams all day. And the first thing I want you to notice is that I'm signed in with a work account, not a personal one. And that that matters because Copilot, the experience changes entirely based on who you are signed in as. And this isn't cosmetic. This is the boundary that determines what Copilot can and cannot see. And then let's orient ourselves a little bit here. On the left, you'll see some of the chat history. And in the center, the chat itself. And depending on your desired outcome, you can instruct Copilot on whether it's answering from web content or work content. And that distinction, web versus work, it's subtle, but it's one of the most misunderstood parts of Copilot. You see, when Copilot answers from the web, it behaves a lot like public AI tools. And then when it answers from work content, it's grounding responses in files and emails and documents that this user already has permission to access. It's the same interface, but very different implications. And then to make this demo a little more realistic, I've intentionally populated this user's OneDrive. This is a demo user. I've populated their OneDrive with a small set of work files. These are the kinds of documents that teams create every day, like project updates, daily reports, maybe meeting summaries. For example, here are several daily field projects from a fictional project called Greenspace. Individually, these files aren't too interesting. They're pretty simple, but what's interesting is what Copilot can do across them. So I'm going to go back to Copilot now, and I'm going to give Copilot a pretty straightforward prompt, and I've pre-typed it here so that you guys don't have to watch me fumble through my keyboard. I'll just paste that in here, but I'm going to give Copilot a prompt. And this prompt is, hey, I want you to review the Greenspace project daily reports and summarize the key work completed, issues, and upcoming activities. So let's go ahead and run that. I'm going to give that to Copilot. And what Copilot is doing here, it's not searching the internet. It's reading multiple documents that this user already has access to, like the Greenspace project reports we just looked at, and it's synthesizing them. And then notice the structure of the response. It separates work completed, issues, and next steps, because those patterns already exist in the documents themselves. So so this is reasoning over your work context, not inventing new information. And this is a good moment to pause here. Copilot didn't ask for special permissions. It didn't cross any boundaries. It simply made existing information more visible and more usable. So I want to pause and set some expectations here very intentionally. What you're seeing today is not a full demo of what Copilot can do. We're not walking through every feature, every app integration, or every productivity scenario. And that's by design. Today's goal is to show one foundational idea, and that's how Copilot reasons over your work context inside the boundaries you already have. And once that makes sense, everything else we'll show in later sessions becomes much easier to evaluate and much easier to trust. And in the next session, we'll start getting hands-on with features, with workflows, and real use cases. But those only make sense once this foundation is clear. And also, one of the most important things to understand about Copilot is not what it can do, but what it refuses to do. So I'm going to give Copilot another prompt here. Let me paste this one in. So I'm going to ask Copilot now, hey, based on the green space project reports, which team member is underperforming? So let's send that one off. Now notice how Copilot responds here. Right? This isn't about tone, it's about design constraints. Copilot is intentionally restricted from making judgments about people, performance, or intent, even when the underlying data exists. So that's not a limitation. That's a guardrail. One of the guardrails that's built into to Microsoft's responsible use of AI and what governs Copilot use. And you can see that here, this enterprise data protection, when you have this green checkbox, that not only means that all your data boundaries and protections that we've discussed are being honored, it also means that the Microsoft responsible AI use policies are also in effect. So if you're ever interested in that, there's a little more detail and you click on that. But some of the things like this note here about your prompts are never used to train foundational models and such. But very thorough, robust AI responsible use policy that Microsoft has for you. You're welcome to read up more on that. But just an example, some of the a potential or a specific guardrail here that Copilot is honoring. And that's why we're starting this series here. Copilot doesn't introduce new risk. It makes existing information easier to see and easier to connect and easier to act on. That's only safe when expectations and permissions and judgment are in place. And the biggest mistake many organizations make with Copilot is it's treating it like a feature rollout instead of behavior change. So before we wrap up today, I want to be very clear about where we're going next. Right? The next session is about guardrails, but it's not going to be a complete security lecture. We're not going to spend an entire hour just telling you all about what you cannot do. We're going to start getting hands-on with Copilot. We'll walk through how Copilot actually works inside everyday workflows and look at core features and experiences people are most likely to use. And then we'll talk about where guardrails generally matter and where they don't. So the goal of the next session is really confidence. Confidence to use Copilot intentionally, confidence to set expectations with teams, and confidence to move forward without fear or over-optimism. Guardrails aren't there to slow adoption. They're there to make adoption sustainable. And then one quick logistical note. So each session in this series is registered separately. So if you plan to join us for session 2, you'll just want to register for that session as well. And you can get to that at trailhead365.com/events, or you can use the QR code here on the screen. I'll give you a second there if anybody wants to jot that down. All right. So before we wrap up, I want to be clear also about the different ways that this conversation can continue because they serve different purposes. As we said, that the next session in this series is going to stay focused on Copilot, and we're going to get more hands-on with how it works. We'll look at features and workflows and talk about guardrails in a very practical way. And that's all online, and it's going to build on today's session. But then separately, on June 24th, we're hosting an in-person AI Foundation workshop. And that's a more interactive discussion-driven session. It's designed for leadership teams who want to step back and think more broadly about AI, not just Copilot. and how it fits into real organizational decision making. So you can register for the workshop at trailhead365.com/AI workshop, or you can scan this QR code. And then if neither of those is the right next step for you, I'm always open to continuing the conversation in whatever format makes sense. Maybe that's a short call, a working session, or something more informal. The goal isn't to rush anyone forward. It's to give you the right environment for the kind of thinking that you need to do next. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today and for spending some of your valuable time here with me. I know it's important, and we really appreciate that. And again, if any of you would like to connect with me, please feel free to reach out. And we hope to see you all on our next session coming up on June 25th. And in the meantime, go out and make it a great rest of your day.